usually be chaos, be children screaming, running around, but for today, it's surprisingly different. Hey, why long faces? Aren't there any activities during the holidays?
Well, they used to, but we just lost the motivation over the years.
Hey, I'm not counting unmotivated list. I tried to motivate you guys, but no.
Hey, you're new. You must have some new ideas, right?
Well, I have this one idea. Alright, now we're going to plan for kindergarten vacation 1.0. So basically, the new Diamond Beach has opened recently. Right before we make this decision, we must ask the parents' permission. Lola, Harvard, you two deal with Pia, Corey, and Carlos's parents. Me and Liz will deal with Luna and Whitney's parents.
Wait. Why do I have to go with you?
Cause you're learning Chinese. Hence, you come with me.
Right.
But what about Villa?
I've made a special plan for her. Since we know that she's a very high standard child, we must obviously work harder to convince her mother.
You mean Mrs. Vacay?
Yes. So y'all mean y'all gonna take my daughter away from me to go to a beach that just opened?
Yes. Well, of course. I will be happy to let her go out running at the seaside for once. As his country folks say, it's better to run than to miss the fun.
Oh my god, for a moment there I thought you were going to rip us into pieces.
What? No, why would I do that? Our peanut butter loves the outdoors. It'll be perfect for her to go on a vacation with her little buddies. Then it's settled. Is there anything that we need to pay attention to?
Oh, just a few.
Mosquito repellent, a few peas for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. A few clothes, some pea soup from the farm, yada yada. Y'all know all those travel stuff.
No wonder why her name is Pia.
You sure?
The child all in our head?
Yep. Her brother is focusing on exams recently. I don't want her interrupting our son's doctor future.
Zach, open the door! Let's play Barbies together!
As you see, he has been locking himself in his room for 2 weeks straight. I have to keep sending in his daily meals. I just don't want her brother to get used to an unhealthy habit. Oh, I understand.
Don't worry, Mrs. Kobashi. As long as I'm here, your daughter will be in great hands.
Most importantly, your son's freedom, of course.
Yes, please, take her immediately.
We will pick her up next week, don't worry!
Sure. The twins are quite a chaos when unsupervised.
Oh, Mrs. Tanner, I've seen worse.
Yeah, you can count on us.
Oh, alright. Boys, run free!
Huh?
Liz, say something.
What should I say?
Anything related to the vacation.
你好，两位是 They are to lead to the about your university too.
Miss Elise, I understand and speak English.
Oh my god, I almost had a stroke there for a second.
Thank God you know English.
What is it do you wish to ask?
Okay, so basically...
Oh, okay. I know it's hard for her to bond with the other kids since she still doesn't know how to communicate in English yet. So, is it okay for me about this vacation?
Oh, that's quick.
Alright team, here we are. Villa's Villa.
So, who's going first?
Why not we do this? Okay, who wants to go in first? Step forward. He was a brave soldier.
NANI?!
What happened?
It didn't work. The first one was too hard.
Lola, it's your turn.
See you on the other side.
Good luck.
A few moments later.
1 minute 58 seconds. 1 minute 59 seconds. 2 minutes. It's been 2 minutes. I think he's going well in there.
You think?
Kara, you're new. You might be the chosen one.
Huh? I'm ready.
Yes, miss, how may I help?
I'm the new teacher, Miss Kara. I'm here to gain Mrs. Revenge's permission for something.
Alright, you wait here while I ask if Madame Vacay accepts your appearance.
This is so awkward.
Follow me. Stand here.
I heard you seek my permission for my little villa's vacation. Am I correct?
Yes. If you can you please open the door so it's easier for us to check? Liz?
Miss Vacay, it's Elise here. I'm so sorry. She's the new teacher. Sorry for disturbance.
Miss Elise. Dearie.
This is Vacay.
Ha 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 ha. Come in, come in.
Me too.
Oh. So, where's this place you are going to?
It's the Diamond Beach, madam.
Oh, Diamond Beach. I was wondering if Villa agrees to take a local vacation. Are you sure that she will accept this?
Yes. We will make sure she will enjoy it. And if she really does not like it, she will at least have some good time there, right?
Hey,
I got this.
I'm convinced. You may take her there. I'm actually curious if she will actually get used to the normal life. All I can say is good luck.
yay.
Thank you so much, Miss Vacay.
Zach, you better not miss me when I'm gone.
Villa, honey, are you sure that you want to go to this vacation of yours?
I'll be fine, Mom. Butler wants to help me back.
Honey, you know it's always okay for you to decline whenever you want. Just remember that.
Mother, it's time for me to really bond with the other kids. Do you really want me to miss this opportunity?
Fine. Au revoir, darling.
Bye.
I'm so sorry, guys, for being this late. It's okay. You're not that late. Turns out you're just in time.
Just make sure to arrive earlier next time.
Okay, I will.
Okay guys, stop babbling. We need to get on the train.
Kids, time to go on the train.
La 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 la. There's a gap. Mommy says when there's a gap, jump over it. Alright. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! I did it! Mr. Hubbard, did you see that? I did it! I jumped over a gap!
Just get on, Luna.
Okay, Miss Lola. Guys, did you see that? I did it!
Come on, Corey.
After you, Carlos.
Diamond Beach, here we come.
For Vacay?
Nani?
Valentine?
Yes, it's a Vacay. It didn't work. Ashley! Wait, is Erica?
Yeah, so pussy on.
Huh?
Yeah, honey.
Yeah.
Sounds like a bug on the other side. Bro!
Bro, that's Erica's real voice.
Fine, Mom. Also,
Butter.
I said Walter. That's the number.
Wink.
I will add that for the paper.
Probably. Wait.
Okay, fine, Mom. Walter.
Can you stop saying Boulder? It's Butler. It's a butt with a lur. Butler. Ashley, why did you add a... Oh my god! Keep your car!
What is this? Wait, what is this? A car?
I am driving a car because I know how to drive in this series. But technically I cannot. Erica, keep your car!
What do you need a car?
Because I need to drive here, duh.
Oh shit. Why can I go on vacation and crash already? That's not, I cannot stop. Oh my. Why is the control so hard? Oh my god,
naked. Okay. Oh my god, you look naked, Erica. 3. I'm so sorry, guys, for being this late. Oi! So annoying.